Juliet sighed, turning her head to look at her sleeping husband. He was snoring again. She was fine if she fell asleep before Peter, but on those nights when sleep was slow to take over her, his snoring kept her awake. It was worse when he slept on his back, so she gently kissed his shoulder and gave him a gentle push, encouraging him to roll over onto his side. With a grunt, he rolled over and his snoring changed from loud like a ship's whistle to a soft purr. Juliet closed her eyes and rolled over onto her back, but it was no use. She was absolutely awake. Juliet's thoughts flitted about randomly, like a bee collecting pollen. But her thoughts were not random. She knew where they were leading and did not resist them, not like before. At first she was terrified of herself, but over time this horror faded. Time has normalized them. Besides, she realized long ago that it was useless. These thoughts were too tempting. They were like fire, starting with a small spark, with a few curls of smoke that came through the cracks. But their power grew, fueled by her attempts to suppress them as well as her surrender. Soon the swirls turned into fog, a blanket covering her mind, sparks into a firestorm. In her imagination, Juliet heard the doorbell ring. She felt herself pull away from Peter again as they sat on the couch and easily ran down the stairs to answer the phone. The memory was so clear, so precise, that she even saw her hand reach out to the doorknob and turn it. She again felt a cold draft coming through the door, filled with snow and stinging her bare skin. She was again surprised and confused as she had been for the first time when she saw Mark on the threshold, framed by the Christmas lights of the building across the street. Why is he here? Why is he holding a boombox and several large cardboard squares? Maybe he wants to give them a selection of works of art as a Christmas gift. After all, he is the owner of the gallery. Juliet's cheeks turned red from shyness. This first meeting since that day in his apartment, when she had admitted her feelings and he had admitted his, had been awkward. She didn't know what to say. Should you invite him inside? And then he smiled. It was a slow and easy smile. She lit up his face, his handsome face. Strange, she had never noticed this before. Shyness gave way to joy, and Juliet responded with a smile. "Oh, hi." That's all she could think of to say. "Who is this?" Peter shouted. Mark quickly put his finger to his lips, indicating that she should remain silent, and at the same time unfolded the large cardboard cards so that they were facing her. On them was written in large print, "Tell them they are carolers." It was at this moment that she experienced the first thrill of excitement. She knew she was teetering on the edge of something forbidden, something illegal. If she did what Mark asked with his signs, she would be lying to her husband. Contrary thoughts fought in her head for only a moment. Telling Peter that his best friend Mark is at the door is a loser. Juliet's curiosity was too great to deny. And what's the harm? It was just a little lie. A little deception. "It's the carolers," she called over her shoulder before turning back to Mark with an uncertain look. "Give them £1 and tell them to get out," Peter shouted back. Juliet watched, unsure but intrigued, as Mark placed the boombox on the threshold and pressed play. The gentle, soft words of "Silent Night" filled the air. Mixed feelings of anxiety and excitement swirled in Juliet's stomach. Did she do the right thing? Wrong? Should she stop Mark before he does anything else? Too late, he turned over the next sign. "Good luck, see you next year." And one more. "I'm going to date one of these girls." Mark showed the fourth tablet. Juliet couldn't help but chuckle a little. It was covered with pictures of sexy models cut out from fashion magazines. She gave Mark an exaggerated nod of approval. It was at this moment that she completely surrendered to the moment, allowing herself to enjoy it. Mark, with a serious expression on his face, showed the next card. "But for now, let me say." Juliet held her breath. Was he going to confess his love? She looked from the card to his face. He still looked serious, relaxed even. He turned over the next card. Without hope or agenda. Their eyes met. She saw sadness and longing in his eyes. Her heart sank in pain for him. "Just because it's Christmas. For me, you are perfection." Their eyes met for a long moment. His gaze asked for understanding. Hers, he apologized for giving her heart to another. And my wasted heart will love you. Juliet looked from the sign to his face again. His eyes radiated the love he felt. There was no shame, no regret, just pure, unconditional love. It was nice. It was wonderful. Juliet's heart began to beat wildly. The blood was boiling in her veins. It was a dizzying feeling to be loved so much. He showed the next card. As long as you don't look like this. Juliet waited impatiently. What will be on the next card? More confessions. Spontaneous laughter burst from her chest when Mark showed the image of the mummy. She felt relieved. Humor dispelled the tension, which just a moment ago was so thick that it seemed almost tangible. Juliet turned her attention back to Mark. He smiled, clearly pleased that he made her laugh. He showed the last card. She wished her a Merry Christmas. Touched, Juliet silently uttered these words in response. Suddenly, she didn't want this moment to end, to break their connection. The whole scene was the sweetest, most unique, most romantic thing anyone had ever done for her, except maybe the surprise serenade at the end of her and Peter's wedding ceremony. With a surge of emotions, Juliet realized that this, too, was organized by Mark. He was such a sensitive, attentive, and creative person, and so romantic. Sensing the change in her mood, Mark placed the last card at his feet and gave her a thumbs up. She knew that he was asking her silently, "Are they okay?" She nodded and smiled, wanting to reassure him. Something tugged at her as he bent down, gathering his things. She looked at the top of his head, noticing for the first time how soft and silky his dark curls looked. She even felt a panicked jolt when he straightened up and, with one last smile, turned and walked away. For a split second she froze, afraid that she would never see him again. She wanted to thank him. Make it clear that she cares about him as Peter's friend. She wanted to give him something to thank him for these precious moments. She watched his retreating figure, torn to pieces. The desire to follow him was strong. It was like a rope connecting them. The further he went, the stronger the need to rush after him to close the distance between them. Forgetting about everything, she succumbed to this impulse and rushed in pursuit. Something told her that she was acting crazy, but it was nice. She ran, the air piercingly cold on her bare skin. Her hot cheeks rejoiced at the coolness. She was out of breath, blood rushing through her veins. It seemed to her that wings had grown at her feet. She hadn't felt this excited since she and Peter had first kissed. She grabbed Mark. He turned around, surprised. Juliet tried to convey with her gaze all the feelings she was experiencing. But this was not enough. She placed her hands on his face, her fingers feeling the smoothness of his cheeks. He must have shaved shortly before the visit. She saw his eyes widen as she leaned in and pressed her lips to his. His lips were so soft, completely different from Peter's dense but elastic lips. They both enjoyed the kiss, forgetting about everything around them. Juliet pulled away and opened her eyes. Mark slowly opened his, and when he did, he looked dazed, almost intoxicated. The power she had over him took over Juliet. She lowered her hands to his chest, lightly gripping his lapels. She pulled them lightly, trying to tell him with her eyes that in another place, and at another time, everything could have turned out differently. Juliet replayed the last moments of the memory in her head, but while her imaginary hands clutched Mark's lapels, her real hands wandered over his naked body. Juliet bit her lip, turning her head to make sure her moan didn't wake Peter, didn't wake me up. Peter's loud, guttural snore acted like a bucket of ice water, chilling his emotions. Her body shook once, twice, 3 times. She was on the verge of tears. She tried to hold on to her favorite memory, but it disappeared like fog under the hot sun. Her guilty pleasure. She didn't want to let him go. Another snore from Peter, and the last piece of that memory faded, leaving her alone with the dark ceiling of their bedroom. Juliet looked out the kitchen window onto the courtyard. An ancient oak tree shaded the back right corner, its roots crawling and clinging beneath the surface like great old gnarled fingers. This tree looked like something out of a fairy tale, and it was one of the reasons she fell in love with this house. Her gaze followed the fence along which they had planted bulbs, daffodils, jonquils, tulips. panorama of lemon, yellow, and white flowers against the background of a green lawn. And under the oak tree, slightly apart from the other guests, stood Peter and Mark, best friends. Everyone had a bottle of beer in their hand. They laughed. We were relaxed. They were probably discussing football. Juliet felt pain from realizing her guilt towards Peter. The pleasure added a few inches to his waist and rounded his cheeks. She loved him no less, but it was undeniable that Mark, on the contrary, seemed to blossom in his beauty. He looked rugged and handsome, thin and fit. She didn't want to make comparisons. She struggled with this because it was akin to betrayal, treason, and she was a good person, not a traitor, but sometimes. Juliet turned away from the window, grabbing the tray of cheeses and snacks that her mother had finished preparing. "I'll smash it, Mom. Why don't you pour yourself some wine and chat? You should also enjoy yourself and not stand here in the kitchen. Okay, honey? Let me know when you're ready to serve hot. I'll help." "Thank you, Mom." Juliet grabbed the tray with both hands and smiled at her mother as she opened the door for her. Juliet walked straight towards Peter and Mark. Peter smiled when he saw her approach. "Great time, darling. I'm hungry." Mark's eyes darted to the side, meeting Juliet's for a moment before running away again, as if he was afraid that prolonged contact would reveal too much. It will give out too much. It was his continued shyness with her that told Juliet that he still loved her. This knowledge was painful, exciting, and terrible at the same time. Juliet looked at Peter, smiling as he greedily stuffed his mouth. He was such a child when it came to food. Every bite was an adventure for him. She risked a glance at Mark, but couldn't hold his gaze. She was also afraid that he would see too much in her eyes. Perhaps he will see that she is fantasizing about him. One careless glance could reveal all her guilty secrets. Even worse, Peter, who knew her so well, could read her thoughts, see her desire. Only two factors stopped Juliet from getting closer to Mark, feeling him, touching him. One is Mark's honor, his loyalty to his friend. The second is her love for her husband. Yes, she still loved him. She couldn't bear to hurt him, but she wished she could live in an alternate universe, one where she could give up her feelings, her moral principles, set them aside, become someone else, at least for a moment, night, day. Juliet shook herself mentally. She needed to stop. Daylight was not suitable for such thoughts. They were for the dark, for silence, to indulge in them alone. Secrets are meant for the night, not for the beautiful August sun, and certainly not for her husband's birthday. The doorbell rang, and although the sound was expected, Juliet flinched. It was Mark. She knew it was Mark because Peter had arranged for him to come and watch the Manchester United match. But that was before he was called into urgent work at the Birmingham office. One of the last things he asked her to do was call Mark and cancel. But she didn't. Juliet raised her hands to her burning cheeks. Her palms were sweaty. My heart was beating wildly. The face was flushed. What was she doing? She was like a moth flying to the fire. She felt like a teenager getting ready for her first date. She had a husband, the man she loved. Thoughts about Mark were dangerous. If Peter ever found out, it would destroy him. Her world would collapse. And yet she stood here and invited the flames into her home. She rinsed her hands under cold water, then pressed them to her face in an attempt to cool her cheeks. Wiping the water off her hands and cheeks with a towel that hung next to the sink, she took a step towards the stairs. She could still change her mind. She could have sent Mark home. But she knew she wouldn't do it. Her decision was made several weeks ago. The night Peter snored after they made love, and she reminisced romantically. Memories that made her body ache and yearn. Juliet considered herself a good person, a kind person, definitely not a cheater. Her thoughts now avoided that word and other words like it. Now she viewed her intentions solely in the context of herself. It was something unfinished. Procrastination that needs to be completed so that it can be put aside as completed. A small gift for yourself and Mark. She always played by the rules and was a good girl. Stayed within the lines as I painted the picture of my life. Tonight, just once, she was willing to push the limits, allow herself to make mistakes, blur the lines. She ran down the first steps, acutely aware of the feel of the skirt she had chosen. The fabric was silky and flowed around her hips with every step. Not too short, not too long. Feminine, sexy, perfect. Her firm breasts bounced slightly under her white blouse. Juliet's breasts were small, but perfectly shaped. She didn't need Peter to remind her of that regularly. She already knew. The blouse revealed her shoulders and long, slender neck. Peter always compared her to a swan, beautiful and graceful. It was the same blouse she wore when Mark seduced her with signs. She was sure that he would recognize her. He was the type of person who remembers details. Juliet opened the door, slightly out of breath and smiling. "Oh, hi, Juliet." Her smile widened when she saw the blush touch Mark's cheeks. She knew he expected Peter to answer the door. "Come in," she invited. Mark held a package of beer in his hand, and Juliet knew from experience that it would be beer from some small brewery. Good beer. She smiled quickly at him again and ran back up the stairs, knowing that with every step the skirt would slide over her hips, revealing a view of her legs and, with some luck, her dainty white lace panties. In her preparations, she thought about wearing a full burgundy red or a sexy black satin one, but in the end she decided that Mark would like the sweet, innocent white panties. She heard Mark stop at the top of the stairs and turned around, noticing him looking around the room. "Where's Pete?" "He was called to Birmingham on urgent business. At best, he will return tomorrow evening. At worst, in a few days." Oh, it was clear that Mark didn't know what to do with this information. Juliet quickly intervened before he could suggest leaving. "He told me to take care of you. Said you needed home-cooked food." Mark continued to stand at the top of the stairs, hesitating. "We can watch the match together. Sit down. I'll bring snacks." She turned and headed into the kitchen, silently praying that Mark would do what she said. What if he doesn't do this? What if he's still standing by the stairs? Not this. Let him sit on the sofa. My heart was pounding. My legs were shaking. She opened the refrigerator door and, closing her eyes, felt the cool air soften the heat that burned on her cheeks. She needed more time to compose herself, but she was afraid to give herself that break for fear that Mark would use the time to make up an excuse and leave. She took out the tray she had prepared earlier. It was overflowing with cheeses, pâtés, sauces, and all kinds of snacks. Balancing it on one arm, she picked up the basket of crackers with the other and headed towards the couch, a too bright smile plastered on her face. Mark sat on the edge of the sofa, trying to get as far into the corner as possible. He turned towards the sound of her approach. "Maybe you can help me with something." "No, everything is under control. I thought we'd start with the appetizers." Juliet smiled at him, leaning next to him to place the tray on the coffee table. She made sure to linger a moment closer than necessary, hoping that he would notice her cleavage or at least smell her perfume. They had to be attractive and irresistible to men. "Damn, what have I come to? Did you buy perfume to seduce a man?" She felt ashamed, but she never had to be seductive. Men were always chasing her. They tried to impress her, but not the other way around. Looks great. Better than the chips and salsa Pete usually serves," Mark said with a nervous smile. Juliet laughed. Her laugh was a little high-pitched and too loud. She hoped Mark wouldn't notice. "Yes, if it were up to Pete, we would never eat vegetables." "Oh, I lied. There would be potatoes. He loves his shepherd's pie and sausage and mash." Mark nodded, smiling. There was warmth and affection in his voice, born of years of friendship. She wanted to take the conversation away from Peter. Talking about husbands was counterproductive to her goal. She straightened the trays and walked back into the kitchen, swaying her hips. With shaking hands, she poured herself some wine and took out a glass of beer for Mark. One look at the trays, and she saw that Mark hadn't taken anything. "Eat," she said, handing him a glass. She sat down in the middle of the three-seater sofa, close but not touching him, and to hide her nerves, she reached for a cracker, spreading it with pâté. Mark ate the olive and Juliet almost choked. How had she not noticed before how beautiful his hands were? Long fingers, They looked strong and capable. Hands you could imagine on a surgeon or maybe a guitarist. He chewed, cutting up a piece of pimento cheese and placing it on a seeded cracker. She tried not to look. Juliet turned away and grabbed the remote, pointing it at the large TV. She didn't want him to get too carried away, but at the same time she was trembling so much that she needed him to be distracted and not notice it. Mark, freeing his hands, opened one of the beers brought and poured it into the glass she gave him. Then he raised the glass to his lips. For a good match, Juliet raised her glass of wine. For success, Juliet watched Adam's apple rise and fall as he took a long sip. She swallowed. Already her body was yearning for him to touch her. She longed for his fingers to run over her skin. The match went on as usual. Mark's attention was focused on the game, while Juliet looked at Mark. And all this time he remained unaware, without touching her even once. Everything was visual, the environment, the sight of his muscles on his thighs when he leaned forward to take something from a tray or encourage a player, his lips when he brought a cracker or olive to them, his fingers when he held a knife and spread the pâté, his profile, his smile, the sound of his voice. During the break, Juliet ran to the kitchen to heat up their dinner and cool down her burning cheeks. She made beef bourguignon with mashed potatoes and green beans, something that could easily be eaten from your lap. It smelled fragrant and delicious, and despite her inner tension, she felt hungry. Hunger in many ways. Mark turned his head as she walked in with his portion on a tray. Wow, looks and smells fantastic. You shouldn't have gone to such trouble. Juliet blushed with pleasure. It wasn't difficult. Their fingers touched as the tray passed from her hands to his. A wave of desire ran through her body. She could hardly wait for his hands to actually touch her. The anticipation made her seem drunk with passion. She returned to the kitchen to pick up her portion and was pleased to see that Mark had waited for her before starting to eat. He was a real gentleman. After thanking her for dinner, they began to make small talk about the upcoming exhibition at the gallery, Jamie's new novel, and Orly's pregnancy with their second child, the upcoming elections. Juliet was amazed that she could string together a few meaningful sentences when what she really wanted to do was throw herself on the floor and pull Mark on top of her to make tender, passionate love to her. He was so sensitive and creative, she was sure that he would be a wonderful lover. She collected their plates and ran back to the kitchen. She heard Mark turn the volume back on the TV. A quiet moan escaped her. She bit her lip, hoping Mark didn't hear her. Another 45 minutes. It will be torture. Sweet torture. With shaking hands, she filled the cones with ice cream, then carefully dipped them into the melted chocolate. She gently twisted them this way and that until the chocolate stopped dripping. Setting them on a small stand, she returned the ice cream to the freezer and removed the chocolate from the water bath. After quickly wiping down the countertop, she was ready to head back to the living room. Chocolate cones. This is just great, Juliet. Thank you. I can never resist them when I go to the movies. A movie without a chocolate cone isn't a movie. Juliet laughed. I think so too. With a crunch, Mark finished his cone and turned to her with a boyish smile. It was wonderful, Juliet. Tell Pete he needs to get away more often if it means I get dinners like this. She didn't understand how it happened, but suddenly she found herself on top of him, her fingers tangled in his hair, her lips on his, her tongue exploring his mouth. Mark froze for a moment, shocked, before placing his hands on her waist, and then he firmly pushed her away. Juliet found herself stretched out on the sofa, dazed, not understanding how she ended up there. Mark stood looking at her in horror. What the hell was that? What were you thinking, Juliet? At any other time his words would have been like a cold shower, but Juliet was too far over the edge, too hot. The cold words only made her want him more. This is me offering you what you have always dreamed of. Mark ran his hand through his hair. We can't. I can't. Pete is my best friend and your husband. It would be wrong. You love me, and I have to admit, I've been fantasizing about you for a long time too. Let's give ourselves this evening. One night. Pete left. He'll never know. But I will know. And you too. The guilt will kill me. What am I saying? This is wrong. I would never do something like that. I'm not that kind of person. I can't lie and betray Peter. Don't think about it like that. We both deprived ourselves of this for years. You're even bigger than me. Tonight, we'll just show ourselves a little generosity. There's no point in feeling guilty. We both love Peter. We'll both do our best to make sure he doesn't suffer from this little treat. What he doesn't know won't hurt him. You are naive. Of course it will hurt him. He just won't know what hit him. Everything will change between us. You will behave a little differently. Me too. You will treat him a little differently. Me too. We'll have a secret that we won't share with Pete. Everything may start out nice and sweet, but eventually it will turn bad, start to rot, and destroy everything. Mark's words did not penetrate her. They weren't what she wanted to hear. She didn't want his truth. She wanted his love, his wishes, his hands on himself. I've been thinking about you for years while Pete sleeps next to me. He never suspected anything, and I didn't lose anything. He is happy and content. What does it mean to take another step further in fantasy? I kept my secret for years, and no one got hurt. Mark groaned, running both hands roughly through his hair. Juliet interpreted his reaction as a weakening of his resistance, another step towards him giving in to desire. No, 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 don't tell me such things. Now, without my participation or consent, you have made me part of my best friend's betrayal. He loves you, truly love. And you too. He can have me any time he wants, but you never can. Is this fair? Come and make love to me. You know you want it. You deserve it. We both deserve it. I love you. Juliet smiled and extended her hand to him. But not like Pete. He loves you in the real world, with all your flaws. Who knows what bad habits you have. You use his razor to shave your legs, making it dull. Squeeze out the toothpaste in the middle of the tube. Throwing dirty panties all over the house and in the bathroom. You're spending too much money. You leave your hair in the sink. You buy every new miracle product that promises a miracle without using the previous one. You shake your friends' bones behind their backs. You take the biggest piece of the pie for yourself. Who knows? I don't know, but he knows, and he still loves you. Unconditionally. Who knows if my love would have stood the test of marriage? For me, you have always been an ideal. So yes, I love you, but that feeling has changed over the years. Once you owned my whole heart, now there is only a corner left in it for you. Some of Mark's words penetrated her, but Juliet was still not ready to give up her fantasy. Having come this far, she felt like she had nothing left to lose. I'm ready to be content with this corner. Please, I've dreamed about us for so long. I just know we'll be so good together. We're perfect for each other. It will be like an earthquake. I know this for sure. We will have this one night to remember for the rest of our lives. Juliet, you are a beautiful and desirable woman, and I am very flattered, but I can't. Pete is my best friend and has been since the first day of high school. He was a cool, athletic guy with charisma, tall and well-developed for his age, popular among both girls and boys. Everyone liked Pete. I was a shy and thin, smart, art-loving nerd. If it weren't for his friendship, I would have been brutally persecuted. I'll never understand why he wanted to be friends with me, but I was always glad he did. I love him, like a brother. He has never let me down, and I cannot return his loyalty with betrayal. Finally, Mark's words broke through Juliet's armor. She didn't know what to say or do. Now she felt stupid and ridiculous, stretched out in front of him with her breasts bare and her skirt pulled up almost to her waist. Her face burned with shame, not desire. Mark looked away. So, thanks for dinner, but I guess I'll go. Juliet did not move from her place. Mark's steps around the room sounded like the beat of a drum, signaling the condemned man's path to the gallows. It was only when she heard the rustling of his coat and the sound of the front door opening and closing that she finally moved. Large tears rolled down her cheeks as she adjusted her blouse and skirt. She rolled onto her stomach on the sofa and let her tears flow. She cried from her stupidity, because he rejected her, and from the loss of your imagination. The next week for Mark was the worst of his life. He was tormented by the question of what to do. Should I tell Peter or remain silent? He felt that he was doomed anyway. His silence made him an accomplice in Juliet's deception. Talking to Peter was guaranteed to hurt. Either way, he lost. Even more than on the day when Juliet found out about his love for her, he regretted that she had found out at all. He wanted it to remain his secret. If Peter found out about her fantasies, found out who the object was, would he blame him? Would he want to kill the messenger and their friendship? They had been friends for over 20 years. The thought of never sharing a beer or laughing together again saddened him, made him empty and devastated. He couldn't imagine a future without Pete, without them sharing life's moments, big and small. Images of their common past flashed through his head. How they rode bicycles, which they later traded for cars in their late teens, how they traveled around Holland, Belgium, and Germany, trying to meet girls, how they were left in only their shorts, playing strip poker with two girls who beat them, how they went to football matches, how they made stupid attempts at skating in Hyde Park, how they returned home in a taxi, drunk out of their minds. So many memories. Peter was a constant in his life. They were closer than many brothers. It was his love and respect for Pete that kept Mark from ever acting on his feelings, something he hadn't done in the 3 years that Peter and Juliet had been dating. In fact, both Juliet and Peter always thought that Mark didn't love her because he always kept her at a distance, even to the point of coldness. But now everything was different. It wasn't about Mark's feelings, not about his actions. It was about Juliet. Anger boiled in his stomach. How could she? How dare she? Pete deserved better. He deserved all her love, thoughts, and desires, all her touches and kisses. What if she fell in love with someone else? Someone who wouldn't say no. Mark opened another beer. He felt bloated from drinking so much, but he was a beer drinker, not a liquor drinker. His father's words suddenly came back to his mind. His father had been dead for a long time, but Mark still missed him. Character, son. Character is what matters. Attitude. Heart. Be true to yourself. Stand your ground and protect those you love. That's what matters. That's what makes a person a person. These words were spoken on his father's deathbed 4 years ago, but Mark heard them as if his father was sitting next to him. But was this one of those times when the truth had to be told? God, how badly he wanted to remain silent and keep Juliet's secret. He could come up with some really good reasons not to say anything. Silence meant he wouldn't be complicit in P's heartbreak. He wouldn't be the one to deeply hurt his best friend. Thoughts rushed around in his head, colliding and bouncing off each other like billiard balls. He knew he had to take his emotions out of the equation. He had to make the right choice for Peter, but what kind of choice was it? Silence or truth? Finally, around midnight, Mark finished his last beer. He knew what he had to do. Mark groaned as he felt his abdominal muscles clench in an iron vise. It almost hurt. It's like he's been training too hard in the gym or going a few rounds with Muhammad Ali. He was more nervous, more stressed than he had ever been before any exam or interview. His head felt full. He doubted his decision. Did he really do the right thing? Will it do more harm than good? Did he really want to open this can of worms? Was he to blame for this? The same questions went around in circles, turning his insides inside out. These questions, like snakes, wriggled in his stomach, trying to break free. His body was too small and too tense to hold them inside. He wanted to get rid of them. They made him feel sick. He knew the only way to get rid of them was to tell Peter everything. Tell him every last thing. Mark moved slowly. Every movement he made was as if he were walking through a viscous liquid. Every part of his body felt heavy, as if he were wading through water up to his waist. But he continued to walk, with his head down and his shoulders slumped. The muffled sounds of laughter made it clear that he had reached his destination, and, glancing left and right, he crossed the street. Looking around, he noticed Peter sitting with a pint of beer at a small table in the back of the pub. Mark saw that Peter had already bought the first round. Another glass was waiting for him. Peter noticed him and waved his hand. Mark nodded, taking a deep breath. He walked toward Peter, more aware than ever of the coil of snakes writhing in his belly. My throat was tight, as if it were clogged with something heavy. It seemed that the snakes could not decide whether to escape through the navel or through the esophagus. His body was too small and too tense to hold them. He wanted them to disappear. They made him feel sick. He knew that the only way to get rid of them was to tell Peter everything to the end. Mark sat down and immediately raised the glass to his lips, taking a large sip. And without wasting a second, he launched his confession. Peter sat silently, looking straight ahead, his hand holding his beer glass tightly, but he never raised it to his lips. Mark would describe his expression as stunned. When Mark finished, he froze. I was expecting screams, questions, accusations, anger, pain, but nothing followed, only the sounds of other people in the pub. He studied Peter's profile, concerned. Wasn't he in shock? Peter continued to look away. Mark felt a sense of relief, although he was ashamed of it. He knew that if Peter turned his head and their eyes met, even for a moment, the pain would be unbearable. And then it began. It wasn't shaking. This was no ordinary shaking. It was a deep, inner shaking, like an earthquake, and it went on and on. It was the vibration that drew the blood from Peter's face, whitening his knuckles. Mark was afraid that Peter would break the glass and cut himself, so he carefully took the beer from his hands. Still, Peter didn't look at Mark, perhaps so as not to drag him into the hell that was now raging in his eyes, perhaps because Mark now disgusted him. Mark continued to study Peter's profile, feeling that it would be a betrayal, a disappointment for his friend if he broke off this contact. Finally, his best friend turned his head, and it was just as painful as expected. Dark eyes looked at him with such pain that their gaze looked like a blow. It took Mark's breath away. I need to leave. I can't be near you right now. Peter's voice was hoarse, as if his words were breaking through shards of glass. Sorry. I'm very, very sorry. Peter just nodded. He stood up, leaving a half-empty glass of beer, and left. Mark watched him, feeling how much of him regretted his confession. Peter was in agony, and it was partly his fault. He cursed Juliet for dragging him into her betrayal. Peter opened the door and walked out, the door closing behind him. Something broke inside Mark. Closing that door completed something. Perhaps friendship, but definitely love. He no longer loved Juliet. Juliet was terrified. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. She couldn't believe Mark told Peter about her seduction attempt. The room spun around her. It seemed to her that her body was being carried somewhere by a whirlwind, but the word whirlwind did not fit. The whirlwind was associated with fun and dance. It wasn't fun. This feeling was disgusting, as if she was being spun around at great speed and was about to break out. Why, Juliet? Just tell me why. Juliet looked at Peter's face, contorted with pain. Her lips moved, but no words came out. She felt paralyzed. Her body didn't listen. Her mind wasn't working. She felt like she was frozen, caught in a nightmare movie. But Peter didn't stop. I thought we had a good life. I thought we were happy. I thought you were happy. I'm happy. We are happy. Don't lie. Juliet shuddered. Never in 10 years had Peter yelled at her like that. Never so that his words bounce off the walls. I'm not lying. I don't. Yes, you're lying. Every damn day of the last 7 years has been a lie. How many times did you think about him while I was making love to you? I. Tell me the truth. I don't think about him. I love only you. He's lying. I don't know why, but he's lying. That's a lie. Lie to save yourself. Save them. She was justified if she saved their marriage. The line has been crossed. Juliet sank deeper and deeper. Anything to save yourself. Save their relationship. To wipe the expression of pained rage from Peter's face. He's in love with me. Mark is in love with me. Always was. He must be trying to separate us. He wants me for himself. Don't listen to him. Don't let him come between us. 10 years later, he suddenly decides to try to separate us. I don't know, Juliet stuttered, clutching at straws. He already tried. Right after our wedding. You mean those signs? When did you tell me that these were carolers? For the second time, Juliet froze, but this time her mind was racing. Did Peter know? How could he know? Did he see from the window? Did you see how she ran after Mark? Why didn't he tell her earlier? Mark told him. What could she say now to save their marriage? Damn Mark. Damn him. I knew all this, Julietta. I've known for a long time. Mark told me. He confessed to me that it was New Year. He told me everything. Juliet collapsed in a chair, shocked. And you continued to be friends with him? Why? Why did you do this? Because in the 3 years that we dated before the wedding, he never tried to do anything. Never flirted with you. I never proposed to you. Never said a word against you. Nothing. And then he confessed to you, realizing he was in love with you. The day you came to his apartment to watch the video of our wedding and what he did with the signs at Christmas. And you trust him more than me? Do you trust your friend more than your wife? The look of sadness that appeared on Peter's face almost broke Juliet. Yes, I believe it. He never lied to me. And you lied. I don't. Enough lies, Juliet. Please. No more lies. Peter collapsed onto the sofa. He looked exhausted, as if he had run a marathon. Tell me why. I need to understand. And she explained everything to him as best she could, feeling her heart breaking into pieces. Saying it out loud, everything seemed so pathetic. She sounded like the worst person ever. She knew this would probably mean the end of her marriage. Peter could never trust her again, but he deserved the truth. It was the least she could do for him. But honey, those were just fantasies. It's you who I love. You are the one I want to spend my whole life with. It was true, but the truth was not enough. She knew it deep down, but she tried anyway. Perhaps, but your fantasy concerned my best friend. Not some famous person, not the faceless billboard model. It was Mark. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hurt you. I never wanted this. It was a moment of weakness. Can one bad action undo 10 years of love? Please, Pete, we can survive this. Maybe you can, but I can't. You ruined everything. Every moment we spend together, every memory, everything is polluted, desecrated. I will never again be able to look at you, touch you, kiss you. Never again be able to make love to you without wondering. It will eat me up from the inside. I'll start to hate you. I'll probably end up hating you. I can't live like this. But I didn't change, not for real. It all ended with one kiss. Please, Pete, please don't give up. You still love me. I know you love me. Didn't you hear what I said? Yes, I still love you. But right now, I also hate you. You've spent the last 7 years fantasizing about sex with Mark. You get turned on by dreaming about another man who is my best friend. Do you really not understand how hurt and betrayed I feel? How small and insignificant? I can barely look at you. I will stop. Peter snorted. It's too late. You can't undo the last 7 years. But I want to. I would like to. I regret it. I'm sorry for everything, for my fantasies, for hurting you. About everything. Doesn't that mean anything? Pete, please, I'm so sorry. I don't want to lose you. I love you so much. Sometimes love is not enough. The sadness and despair in Peter's voice hung between them like a heavy blanket, squeezing all the air out of the room. Peter broke the silence. I'll stay somewhere else tonight and come back for my things at the weekend. Panic grew inside Juliet. Everything really happened. He really was going to leave her. It wasn't a bad dream. Not a nightmare. This was reality. She couldn't believe it, and she could only blame herself. She wanted to blame Mark, blame fate, blame someone, something. She was losing the best thing that had ever happened in her life and couldn't find any outside force to point her finger at. It tore her apart. Are you going to stay with Mark? Juliet didn't know where the question came from, but as soon as it left her lips, she felt a surge of jealousy and anger. Mark, damn honest, correct Mark. Everything would be fine if he just kept his mouth shut. No, I can't. Don't you understand? I feel humiliated. I couldn't satisfy my wife. Because of what you did, I can't even look at him now. One more thing I can thank you for. I lost more than just my wife. I lost my best friend too. Thank you. Thank you, Juliet, thank you. Peter's words were full of bitterness. It matched the expression on his face as he stood up from the couch. Juliet also stood up. She couldn't believe it was really over. Peter turned and headed towards the stairs. Juliet couldn't let his last words be like that. She couldn't allow his last look to be filled with such hatred. I love you, Peter. I really love you. He reached the stairs and turned to her. You should have remembered that when it mattered. When temptation knocks on your door. 5 years later. Peter glanced at Hannah in the dim light coming from the wall light above them. This light cast shadows on her pretty face, highlighting her high cheekbones. It seemed to him that the pub was trying to create a feeling of privacy, maybe even romance. He looked around the room and noticed several couples and groups sitting in booths along the walls. He was surprised that he was nervous. It seemed to him that he could hear his own heartbeat, and it was like many balls bouncing in the gym. It had been 5 years since he last saw Mark. Even though he really wanted to see him, talk to him, or just spend time together, he couldn't do it. The humiliating feeling he felt was too deep. The whole Juliet thing changed the status quo in their friendship. Everything was turned upside down. As a child, Peter was popular, the one everyone loved and respected. Juliet's betrayal changed that irreversibly. The loss of a friend was huge, devastating, like the loss of a wife. At a difficult moment, he should have turned to Mark, but Juliet's betrayal made this impossible. In the early days, he thought about talking to Jamie about it. If anyone could understand his feelings, it would be Jamie. After all, his girlfriend before Aurelia cheated with his own brother. Damn it. How vile. But Jamie was not Mark. He was a good friend, but not the closest. And so Peter kept it all to himself until he met Hannah. Something about her invited honesty, truth. Thoughts about Mark inevitably led to thoughts about Juliet. She didn't take the divorce well. She was practically stalking him. So much so that he moved to work in an office in New York, where, ironically, he met Hannah, another British expat. Even in New York, he had heard rumors about what Juliet was doing. It's strange how people feel the need to keep you updated on what your ex is doing. She was said to have dated different men for some time until she finally got married again a year or two ago. If rumors true, her second marriage didn't work out either, and apparently, this guy will also soon become her ex-husband. The void left in his life by Mark's absence was enormous, especially at the beginning. Time and physical distance helped, but never completely filled that void. Hannah's encouragement helped him overcome his fear of Mark's possible rejection and write him a letter. He was ashamed that it had taken more than 3 years to reach out to his friend again, but the humiliation of Juliet's betrayal was too deep. Peter knew that Mark deserved better from him, and he certainly didn't intend to remain silent for so long, but as time went on, it became more and more difficult to take the first step. Time itself became an obstacle, like an ever-widening abyss. Mark had done nothing wrong. On the contrary, he had shown the depth of his devotion by rejecting Juliet's advances and becoming the messenger of such devastating news, and Peter knew that by his silence he was punishing his friend. Mark put Peter's long-term well-being above his own interests, and Peter reciprocated with distance. Peter remembered checking his email every hour after he finally hit send. He half expected Mark to ignore the letter or respond rudely. Instead, his friend received him warmly. Peter knew full well how lucky he was. They had been cyber friends for almost 2 years now. Correspondence helped Peter gradually restore friendship. He suspected that Mark understood this, because although Mark was always quick to respond and friendly, he never insisted on meeting. But now he and Hannah were back in London, and meeting his best friend face to face could no longer be put off. Peter stared into the amber foam of his beer. His hand shook slightly, causing ripples on the surface of the drink, threatening to overflow. He quickly raised the glass to his lips and took a long sip. Hannah put her hand on his. Her touch was warm and soothing. Everything will be fine, dear. If he is even half the friend you describe him as, he will be glad to see you back and want to see you. Peter smiled at her. He thought he would spend the rest of his life alone and loveless after his divorce from Juliet. He was surprised that the divorce didn't kill him. At the time, it seemed to him that a bullet to the head or heart would have been more merciful. Hannah proved him wrong. His love for her did not strike him like lightning, as it did with Juliet. No, she grew quietly until one day she penetrated every cell of his body, and he realized that he could not imagine his future without her. There were so many things he loved about her. Her laugh, for example. She laughed all over, throwing her head back, her neck bared for a moment before she leaned forward, covering her mouth with her hand in an attempt to contain the volume. He loved her calmness, behind which her active mind was hidden. She would tilt her head to the side and listen without interrupting, and then in a few sentences she would get to the point. And he loved her kindness and wisdom. In the beginning, when he doubted himself, when he doubted whether he was good enough, whether he was worthy of her, whether he was capable of satisfying her both physically and emotionally, she stopped him. Don't do this. Don't doubt yourself. Don't get stuck in this negative cycle. There is no reason to believe that Juliet's infidelity had anything to do with anything you said or did, or anything you didn't say or do. Her betrayal is her fault, not yours. These words freed him. Hello, Pete. Peter looked up and met the face of his childhood friend. It hasn't changed much in the last 5 years. Mark smiled, a little shyly and timidly, but happily. Peter stood up and extended his hand. Mark readily grabbed it. At that moment, Peter realized that everything would be fine between them. Mark, I would like to introduce you to my fiancée, Hannah. Hannah, this is my best friend, Mark. And subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one.